Welcome to For Love and Money, a podcast with the Lesbian Review where we discuss the ins and outs of selling sapphic fiction. Today, my guest is Cal Faolan, editor extraordinaire, who's here to talk about how to make your book the best it can be and sell the most copies possible. Welcome, Cal. Thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Hi, Rae. It's good to be here.
I'm so glad that you're here. It makes me really happy. Okay, so can you talk about your experience as an editor a little bit? Where your knowledge comes from?
It starts off coming from editing my own books. I would also say it comes from taking a lot of creative writing classes in college, and getting a sense of how the workshop process works. And it's not quite the same as editing because it's kind of one-sided, but that definitely taught me how to both give and take critique. The compliment sandwich is a good method for that, although I don't always use it because, as Rae can tell anyone, I'm very mean as an editor.
You're not mean. You're a great editor. Cal actually edited my latest book, Lucky Seven, and it's been extremely well received. And they also edit other manuscripts for Desert Palm Press, and they've edited for I will keep the name anonymous, but they edited for a well-respected magazine in the Baltimore area. So they have some experience on the ground with this whole editing thing, and they're very, very good at it.
Thank you.
You don't have to be modest on this podcast. You can talk yourself up.
No, it's okay. Yeah, so I have been an editor at a magazine as well, and doing copy editing things as well. Although that's quite different from editing fiction, but all of it contributed to a sense of learning how to tell people that their work sucks and here's how to fix it. Not literally that, but
It's okay. This podcast is a safe place.
Thank you.
So, Cal, can you talk a little bit about what you do to help authors of fiction craft the most compelling story they're capable of? Because it's not just about fixing typos; it's about structural editing. So, how do you help authors create a better product?
Well, as you mentioned, it's not just about copy editing. There's a bunch of different kinds of editing, and I've heard them called various different things, like copy editing, obviously, structural editing, developmental editing, content editing, various different things like that. And it depends on both, when I started the process with the author, um, and also what they need from me. One of the things that I think I do best is developmental editing. Like, obviously, I have a pretty sharp eye for typos and misplaced colons and what have you. But another thing that I am good at, and that I do for authors is I take a look at what their where their story's going. I try to see any plot holes overall, and figure out how to help them fix those. And I kind of, the author's on the ground, in the forest, in the weeds with their work, and I'm kind of in a helicopter up above, telling them where to go to get through this forest that is their book, and also where to trim and prune so that it's actually a forest that people want to go into as opposed to a tangled nightmarish mess.
It's a forest that screams when it's trimmed because editors don't want to kill their babies. I mean, authors don't want to kill their babies. Editors are willing to do that when it needs to be done.
Right.
I know this from personal experience.
Sometimes I come in there with the clippers and I hand them gently to you. Other times I fly overhead with the napalm.
Oh no. In your experience, what are some of the most common mistakes authors make that will cause a reader to abandon or decide not to purchase a book or to return the book? Because Amazon does let you return books. What are the biggest mistakes that you see?
I mean, if I see too many typos, I will definitely put it down. If I see that, it's not properly punctuated, or there's too much repetition of various things, the narration is clunky, the writing is clunky, and that's, those are all things that I work with authors to, help streamline their prose. And that can involve, fusing some sentences together. That can also involve chopping them up. It depends on, the needs of the particular scene. But as a reader myself, that's what I would probably put a book down for. Or if it, for example, a story's kind of cliche, um, the characters, and I mean, all characters are pieces. They have pieces of ourselves in them because we can't help but do that as writers. But they they should have something a little bit. It's not just the idealized version of me getting all the girls and winning all the fights.
Well, straight male authors write like that, so I think it's okay to put a little of that in, but too much is a little
Right.
off-putting. I agree.
I mean, I would hope we'd be better than them.
Yeah, I would hope so too. But it is important. I'm glad you brought up the typos because a recent survey by A.E. Radley collected interview data from lesbian and bisexual readers of sapphic fiction. And for 58.7% of readers, more than 5 mistakes in a book is unacceptable and will cause them to stop reading. And 24.5 say even one typo is unacceptable, which is scary for me because there's always something. So it's really important to have an editor. So what advice do you have for authors who are working with an editor? What is the most effective way to work with your editor so your book is the best it can be and you can sell as many copies as possible?
Well, understand that first of all, and this is coming from someone who has the dual perspective of being a writer and being an editor. So I understand your pain. I do, and I understand how painful it can be to have your baby ripped apart. This baby that you've, spent so much time and so much effort on, and all of a sudden there's all of this red ink. And I get that that can be really painful, but as I mentioned, the editor's kind of your eye in the sky here. They're looking at it from the perspective of someone who didn't write it and who didn't, give birth to it. And who can tell you when, this is not exactly where it needs to be. It can be nip and tucked here. It can be cut out completely there. Um, so as a writer, just remember you can't see everything. But also give yourself time to feel your feelings about this. Uh, give yourself a 24-hour screen period after you've looked over it to
Well, I definitely do that for sure. As my editor for Lucky 7, you knew I had to take like 24 hours to just cry about it before I could go back and tear it apart and fix everything that needed fixing.
right, call me every name under the sun, do whatever you have to do. But then come back and look at it and think, does Cal actually have a point? Does my editor actually have a point? And I think for me as a writer, a lot of times the answer is yes. Also remember that your editor is on your team. They're there to help you and they want to make this book the best that it possibly can be. That's what you're paying them for. So they're not doing this to put you through unnecessary pain. They're doing this to, make this book the best that it possibly can be. Also, if something is unclear to you, if something pops up and you're wondering, okay, why are they saying this? Ask questions. Definitely ask questions. Create a dialogue. When we were working on Lucky 7, we were going back and forth all the time. Talking about particular aspects of the plot or the world building, everything like that.
Yeah, we had entire documents just of like editing notes that were separate from the story document.
Right. And I think for me anyway, I work very much in the Socratic method, where a lot of my editing notes will be questions. Why is she doing this? What is she feeling here? Why is this happening when I thought that per the world building that should be happening here? And I think a lot of what I'm looking for is patterns and consistency. And so if I see inconsistencies, which, manuscripts, novels can be long, of course there's going to be some, I'll point them out to you. And we can work to resolve them into the greater whole so that your cool stuff actually works with the whole rest of the plot.
You're so eloquent. I appreciate you being on the show with me.
Really,
So
it all right now.
I want to say I'm sure a lot of the writers listening to this podcast are self-published authors, and that's great. Self-publishing is a totally workable, effective profitable way to produce your work. But you can't do self-publishing alone. You have to have an editor on your team. I mean, you also ideally should have a cover artist and a proofreader and, you know, all that other stuff. But, you know, if you can only have one other person on your team, pay to have a good editor because it's so worth it. An editor's job is to see what your intentions are as a writer and make those intentions shine through as brightly as possible. And an editor's good work will sell more copies of your book. It is a direct correlation, as I know from experience. So, I mean, I know that this podcast is about selling books, but if you don't have a good editor, you will not sell copies of your books. It is just that simple. So I would encourage you to, even if you're a self-published writer, pay to get a good editor who understands what your motives are and understands what your intentions are and is equipped to help them show through as brightly as possible. So in that vein, where can people find you online or inquire about your services, Cal? Since you are, in addition to working for Desert Palm Press and other people, you are also a freelance editor who takes fiction manuscripts, especially lesfic fiction.
Yes. Well, I don't have a website set up at the moment, but you can reach me at my email account. That's cal.faolan@gmail.com. So that's C as in cat, A as in apple, L as in lesbian, dot.
Now that you've done that, I'm just going to say I can totally put that in the show notes. You didn't have to spell it out.
Well, you know what? Fine, then cut that.
I loved your creative NATO-phonetic alphabet, though. It was very impressive.
That was
it made
not
me laugh.
NATO-phonetic. I used to have that all memorized.
That's why I'm teasing you, because it clearly wasn't. I don't think the L in the NATO-phonetic alphabet is lesbian, although I wish it was.
Totally is.
It clearly should be.
Totally is.
Anyway, I can't recommend your services highly enough. I can't recommend the services of an editor highly enough. So thank you so much for being on the podcast. You are far and away one of the most talented editors I've ever worked with. You have turned Lucky 7 into my best work ever so far. And I hope that everyone out there will take my advice, and even if you're working with a publisher and you just feel like something's not clicking with your editor, make sure to foster that relationship, because it will absolutely pay off in the final product. Anyway, it is time for us to say goodbye, Cal, but thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for tuning in to the Lesbian Talk Show. This was For Love and Money, Episode 3, where we interviewed Cal Faolan, editor extraordinaire, who had so much expertise to share that we'll have to have them on again sometime. Next week, we will be interviewing Jay from Ilva Publishing to talk about how she supports her authors in their quest to spread their book far and wide across the globe. If you have any comments for the show, you can email podcast@thelesbiantalkshow.com, or you can join our Facebook group. Also, please consider becoming a patron to the Lesbian Review and the Lesbian Talk Show, and I will see you in 2 weeks. Happy writing!